She told me to leave, but what happened next changed everything. When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply nodded, picked up my small suitcase, and walked toward the door. The sound of my slippers against the tiled floor echoed in the silence. Behind me, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, and the distant laughter of my grandchildren playing in the backyard. I stood there for a moment, holding my breath, wondering if someone would stop me. If my son would appear from the hallway and say, "Mom, wait, you don't have to go." But no one came. And so I turned the doorknob, opened the door, and stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sun was setting, orange light spilling across the quiet street, painting the pavement with warmth I no longer felt inside me. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could look so peaceful while my heart felt so heavy. That night, as I sat alone on a bus heading back to my small apartment across town, I realized something important. Sometimes love doesn't end with shouting or anger. Sometimes it ends quietly, like a candle that burns until it has nothing left to give. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 63 years old, a retired school teacher, and for most of my life, I thought I understood love. I thought love was simple. You give, you care, you forgive. But love in families, well, that's different. It's layered, complicated. It's the kind that can warm your heart and break it at the same time. My son Daniel was my whole world. I raised him alone after my husband passed away when Daniel was just 12. Losing my husband was the hardest thing I'd ever been through, but Daniel became my reason to keep going. He was a quiet boy, gentle, thoughtful, the kind of child who never forgot to hug his mother before bed. Even when we didn't have much, he would smile and say, "It's okay, Mom, we've got each other." Those words carried me through more nights than I can count. When he grew older, Daniel studied engineering, got a good job, and eventually met Lena, the woman who would later become his wife. I still remember the first time he brought her home. It was springtime, warm breeze, fresh flowers blooming outside. Lena walked into my house wearing a light blue dress, her hair neatly tied back. She was polite, charming even, and when she smiled, her dimples reminded me of the ones Daniel had when he was a boy. I liked her instantly. After dinner that night, while Daniel was washing dishes, Lena sat beside me and asked, "Mrs. Miller, can I call you Mom?" I remember my heart swelling. Of course, I said yes. In that moment, I thought, this is it. My family is growing. My son has found someone who will love him as much as I do. When they got married a year later, I cried at the ceremony. Not because I was sad, but because I was proud. I thought I was gaining a daughter, but time has a way of showing us the things we couldn't see at first. After their wedding, Daniel and Lena bought a house in the suburbs. They were busy starting their new life, new jobs, new routines, and I tried not to intrude. I visited when invited, brought homemade soup, knitted baby clothes when Lena became pregnant. When my first grandchild, Eli, was born, I felt a joy I can't put into words. Holding him in my arms, I thought, this is the circle of life. My little boy had become a father, but after a few months, I began to notice small changes. Lena would sigh when I offered to help. She would rearrange the things I cooked or redo the laundry after I folded it. Once I overheard her tell Daniel quietly, "Your mom means well, but she's a little much." I remember pretending not to hear. I smiled, continued folding the baby's clothes, and told myself not to take it personally. But you can feel it, can't you? That invisible wall that grows between people, not because of one big fight, but because of 100 tiny silences. Still, I kept trying. I told myself that families sometimes need space to find their rhythm. I told myself that if I just stayed kind, patient, and understanding, everything would be okay. When Daniel's second child, Amelia, was born, they asked if I could stay with them for a few weeks to help out. I said yes immediately. It was a cold February morning when I arrived. Snow outside, coffee brewing in the kitchen. I felt happy to be needed again. The first few days were fine. I cooked, cleaned, and rocked the baby to sleep while Lena rested. But slowly, I noticed her mood changing. One night, as I was washing bottles, I heard Lena talking to Daniel in the next room. Her voice was quiet but tense. "She's always here," she said. "I feel like I can't breathe in my own house." Daniel tried to calm her down, saying, "Mom's just helping, Lena." But her words stayed with me. I can't breathe in my own house. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, listening to the soft creak of the house and wondering how something so warm could feel so cold. The following morning, I decided to keep my distance. I spent more time in my room, read books, and only came out when I was needed. When Lena offered to cook, I said, "Of course, dear." When she wanted to take over the laundry, I let her. I told myself, it's her home. I should make her comfortable. But even when I tried to fade quietly into the background, I could sense her discomfort. There was a tension that filled every silence, every small conversation. Until one day, it all came to a quiet, heartbreaking end. It was a Sunday afternoon. Lena had just returned from the grocery store, and I was in the kitchen preparing soup for Eli, who wasn't feeling well. She came in, stood by the counter, and took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the grocery bags down. "Maggie," she said softly, "can we talk?" I turned, smiling. "Of course, dear. Is everything okay?" She hesitated. Then she said the words I never thought I'd hear. "I think it's time you go home. You've done so much, but we need our space now." For a second, I didn't move. The spoon in my hand hovered above the pot. I could feel the heat from the stove, the sound of the soup bubbling, and yet everything felt distant. I looked at her, not angry, not even surprised. Just sad, because deep down, I'd known this day was coming. "I understand," I said quietly. She looked at me, her eyes darting away as if she couldn't stand the silence between us. "Please don't take it the wrong way," she added quickly. I need to feel like this is my home again." I nodded. "I know," and that was it. No shouting, no crying. Just a quiet ending to something I had once called family. That night, I packed my things while Daniel put the kids to bed. He didn't say much, just gave me a long hug and whispered, "I'll come visit soon, Mom." I smiled and said, "Of course you will." But I knew he wouldn't. Not for a while. Because sons rarely stand between the woman they love and the mother who raised them. When I stepped outside, I took one last look at the house, the porch light glowing, the curtains gently moving in the breeze. I whispered, "Take care of them, Lord," and walked down the driveway with my suitcase. The cold air stung my face, but my heart felt strangely still. Not angry, not bitter, just done. That was the night everything changed. Not because I left my son's home, but because I realized that sometimes love means stepping away, even when every part of you wants to stay. The first few days after I left Daniel's house were the hardest, not because of the loneliness, though that came too, but because of the silence. You don't realize how loud a home full of family is until it's gone. The laughter of children, the soft clatter of dishes in the sink, the way someone says your name without even thinking. Suddenly, it was just me, and the hum of my refrigerator. I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a cozy living room, a small kitchen, and a bedroom with a window that looked out toward the street. I had decorated it years ago with photos of Daniel and the kids, drawings they made for me, and little knickknacks from my teaching days. But after leaving their house, even my own apartment felt unfamiliar, like it had been waiting for someone who no longer existed. That first morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and stared at the empty chair across from me. I thought about how, when Daniel was little, he'd sit there every morning eating toast before school. He'd hum songs under his breath, sometimes with peanut butter on his chin, and I'd remind him to grab his homework. Now, the chair stayed empty, and for the first time in many years, I had no one to care for. No reason to wake up early, no lunch boxes to pack, No bedtime stories to tell. Just me, the ticking clock, and my thoughts. That kind of silence. It makes you remember things. Old arguments, moments you could have handled differently. I kept wondering, did I stay too long? Did I make her feel like I was in the way? It's funny how guilt creeps in, even when you've done nothing wrong. Even when you know your heart was pure. I kept replaying that Sunday afternoon, the way Lena's voice trembled when she asked me to leave, the way Daniel avoided my eyes. Maybe I should have seen it coming sooner. Maybe I should have given them space before she had to ask. I told myself these things over and over, as if reasoning with pain would somehow make it smaller. But grief doesn't listen to logic. It just sits quietly beside you, like an old friend who refuses to leave. A week passed before Daniel called. His voice was tired, maybe even guilty. "Hey, Mom," he said. "I just wanted to check if you got home okay." "I did," I told him. "Everything's fine here." There was a pause. "How's Lena?" I asked. "She's okay. Things are just a bit tense right now. You know, the new baby, work, no sleep." I smiled softly into the phone. "I understand." "You take care of her." "Take care of yourself." He hesitated again before saying, "I'll bring the kids over soon, I promise." But he didn't. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Every now and then, I'd send a small gift. A book for Eli, a sweater I knitted for baby Amelia, a birthday card for Lena. Sometimes they'd send a thank you text. Sometimes not, I didn't mind. At least I told myself I didn't. But on nights when the wind pressed against my window and the world outside felt too big, I would whisper a quiet prayer. "Lord, please keep them safe, even if they forget me. Let them be happy." One afternoon, while I was watering the little fern by my window, I saw the mail carrier slip an envelope into my mailbox. It was from Daniel. My heart skipped a beat. It had been so long since I'd seen his handwriting. I wiped my hands on my apron and tore it open carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small hand-drawn picture. It was from Eli. He had drawn a house with 4 people in front: Daniel, Lena, baby Amelia, and me. Above it, in uneven letters, he had written, "Grandma, I miss you." My eyes blurred instantly, and beneath the drawing, in Daniel's handwriting, were a few simple words. "I know things have been quiet, but Eli talks about you every day. We'll visit soon, I promise." I held that letter to my chest and cried, not out of sadness, but relief. Because in that small gesture, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. The next few weeks, I felt lighter. I started baking again. Banana bread, muffins, small things I could share with my neighbors. Sometimes I'd take a walk to the park and watch other families play. It didn't make me sad anymore. It reminded me of what love looks like when it's simple. There was one woman I met often there, Mrs. Lawson, a retired nurse who always fed the pigeons by the fountain. We'd sit together sometimes, talking about our children and the way the world keeps changing faster than we can keep up. She told me once, "You know, Maggie, when my daughter got married?" I felt invisible for a while. It wasn't her fault, just life moving forward. That word stuck with me. Invisible. It wasn't meant unkindly. It was just true. When your children grow up, you fade from the center of their lives. You don't disappear, but you become part of the background, the quiet love that holds everything together, even if no one sees it anymore. A few months later, I was making tea one evening when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "Mom, can we come by this weekend? The kids miss you." My heart leapt. I typed back immediately. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll bake your favorite pie." I spent the next 2 days cleaning my little apartment, buying fresh flowers, and cooking enough food to feed an army. I even took out the small rocking chair I'd kept for Eli when he was a baby. When they finally arrived that Saturday, I felt nervous, like I was meeting them for the first time again. Eli ran straight into my arms, shouting, "Grandma!" He smelled like sunshine and grass, and for a moment, it was as if no time had passed at all. Daniel hugged me tightly, and even Lena smiled politely as she stepped inside. She looked tired, her hair tied up, dark circles under her eyes. But there was something softer about her that day, something less guarded. We sat together in the small living room, eating pie and laughing about old stories. Eli showed me his drawings, and baby Amelia tugged on my scarf while I made funny faces at her. It was peaceful, familiar. Until at one point, Lena looked around my apartment and said quietly, "This place suits you, Maggie." "It feels calm," I smiled. "It's home." She nodded, then hesitated before saying something that caught me completely off guard. "I want to apologize for before." The room went still. Even Daniel looked surprised. Lena's eyes were shiny with tears she didn't let fall. I was overwhelmed back then. The babies, work, my own fears. "I thought you were judging me, but you weren't. You were just being kind." I didn't say anything for a moment. I just looked at her, the woman who had once made me feel like a stranger in my own family. And I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Not pride. Not anger. Just exhaustion and regret. So I reached out and touched her hand gently. "It's all right, dear," I said. "Sometimes love gets lost in the noise of life. What matters is that it finds its way back." She squeezed my hand and smiled faintly, and for the first time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, healing had begun. That night after they left, I stood by my window watching their car drive away. The streetlights cast a warm glow over the road, and I felt an ache in my chest. Not the painful kind this time, but the kind that comes when something broken begins to mend. For the next few months, they visited more often. Birthdays, small dinners, Sunday afternoons filled with laughter. The children filled my apartment with noise and joy again. I didn't push for anything more. I didn't ask for explanations or try to move back into their world. I was content just to be part of it from where I stood, because sometimes love doesn't have to live under the same roof to stay alive. It just needs room to breathe. But then, one morning, something unexpected happened. Something that would test everything I had learned about love, distance, and forgiveness. I received a call from the hospital. Daniel had been in an accident. When the hospital called, time stopped. I remember the nurse's voice, calm but distant. "Mrs. Allen, your son Daniel has been in a car accident. He's stable, but we'd like you to come in as soon as possible." For a few seconds, I couldn't move. The phone trembled in my hand. Stable. That word sounded reassuring, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Stable meant alive, but not fine. I grabbed my coat, barely locking the door behind me, and drove through the afternoon traffic. My heart pounding louder than the rain that had started to fall. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and fear. White walls, hurried footsteps, voices calling out medical terms I didn't understand. When I reached the reception, I managed to say his name. Barely. "Daniel Allen," I whispered. The nurse nodded and pointed me toward the ICU. When I reached the waiting area, I saw her, Lena, sitting there with her face buried in her hands. For a second, I froze. We hadn't spoken much outside of polite visits, but at that moment all of that disappeared. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. When she saw me, she stood and whispered, "He's inside. He's not awake yet." I walked over and held her. No words, just the kind of embrace that comes when two people who once misunderstood each other finally stand on the same side of pain. The doctor came out a few minutes later, a tall man with kind eyes. "He's stable," he said. "He has a mild concussion, a few broken ribs, and some bruising. He'll need rest, but he's going to be okay." I felt my knees weaken with relief. "Can I see him?" I asked. He nodded. When I walked into that cold hospital room, I stopped at the doorway. Daniel was lying there, pale and still, with wires attached to his chest and a soft beep filling the silence. His face looked peaceful, almost like he was just sleeping. I took a slow breath and walked to his bedside. My hand trembled as I reached out and touched his hair, the same way I used to when he was a boy. "Hey, sweetheart," I whispered. "It's Mom. I'm right here." He didn't respond, but I kept talking anyway. "You scared me, you know that. I just got you back, and now this." I tried to laugh, but it came out as a sob. Lena stood by the door quietly, holding her arms around herself. I turned to her and asked softly, "How did it happen?" She shook her head. "He was driving home from work. A truck ran a red light. They said he swerved, or it could have been worse." I closed my eyes, whispering, "Thank God." The next few hours felt like days. I sat beside Daniel, watching the monitor, listening to every beep as if my love alone could keep him breathing. Lena sat across from me silent. Occasionally, she'd get up, check her phone, or go speak with the nurse. At one point, she looked at me and said quietly, "I didn't call you right away." I didn't know if I should. Her honesty stung, but I understood. "You did the right thing," I told her. "You called me. That's what matters." She nodded slowly. Then, after a pause, she whispered, "I don't know what I'd do if I lost him." Her voice cracked on those words. I reached across and held her hand. "We won't lose him," I said. "He's too stubborn for that." And somehow, we both laughed through our tears. That night, as the rain tapped softly against the hospital window, I dozed off in the chair beside Daniel's bed. It was the kind of half-sleep where memories and reality blur together. I dreamt of him as a boy again, running through the backyard, laughing, his little hands full of wildflowers he'd picked for me. He ran toward me, shouting, "Mom! Don't move! I got something for you." And when he reached me, he handed me a small, crumpled bunch of daisies. In the dream, I laughed. In real life, I woke up crying. When I opened my eyes, the morning light was spilling through the blinds. And that's when I heard it. A faint voice. "Mom?" My heart stopped. I turned and saw Daniel's eyes fluttering open. He looked dazed, weak, but aware. "Daniel," I whispered, gripping his hand. "Oh, thank God." He smiled faintly, wincing as he tried to sit up. Don't cry, Mom. I'm okay." I laughed softly through my tears. "I'll stop when you stop scaring me like this." He squeezed my hand weakly. "Where's Lena?" "I'm here," she said, rushing over from the doorway. She kissed his forehead and held his hand from the other side. For a few moments, the three of us just sat there. No words, just the sound of our breathing, the steady rhythm of life returning. Later, when the nurse came in to check his vitals, I stepped out to give them space. I found myself standing by the hallway window, staring at the rain-soaked parking lot below. That's when Lena joined me. She didn't say anything for a while. Then quietly, she said, "I need to tell you something." I turned to her. "What is it?" She looked down, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "When I asked you to leave, that day I didn't just do it because I felt uncomfortable. I did it because—" She paused, swallowing hard. "I thought Daniel loved you more than me." Her confession hit me like a wave. I opened my mouth, but she continued quickly. "I know how terrible that sounds. But I had just given birth, I was scared, I was trying to be the perfect wife and mother, and you were so good at everything. I felt like I could never live up to you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought if you were gone, maybe I'd finally feel enough." I took a long breath, letting her words settle. Then softly I said, "Oh, Lena, motherhood isn't a competition. It's a circle. There's room for both of us." She covered her face and started crying quietly. "I see that now, but back then I didn't, and I hurt you for it." I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. "We all hurt the people we love when we're afraid. What matters is what we do after," she nodded, whispering, "I'm sorry, truly." And for the first time, her apology didn't come from guilt. It came from love. The days that followed were filled with healing. Daniel slowly regained his strength. Lena and I took turns staying at the hospital, bringing him soup, reading to him, and managing the kids at home. One afternoon, as I was helping him eat, he said something that caught me off guard. "Mom, I heard you that night. I frowned. What do you mean? When I was unconscious, I heard your voice. You were telling me to come back. To not leave you yet. My chest tightened. I don't even remember what I said. He smiled weakly. You said, "You still have more love to give, Daniel. Don't you dare give up now." Tears welled up in my eyes. Maybe God let you hear it, I whispered. He nodded slowly. I think he did. When Daniel was discharged, I went to their house to help him settle in. It felt strange walking through that front door again. The same door I'd left months before, after being told I'd stayed too long. But this time, the air felt different, warmer. The kids ran to me immediately. Eli hugged my legs and said, "Grandma, are you staying this time?" I smiled, crouching down to his level. "I'm staying for dinner, sweetheart." "That's enough for now." He grinned and ran off to show me his new toy. I stood in the living room for a moment, taking everything in, the scent of dinner, the sound of laughter from the kitchen, the hum of life that had once felt close to me. Then Lena walked over, drying her hands on a towel. "I made something special tonight," she said. "Your favorite, roasted chicken with herbs." I laughed softly. "You remembered?" "Of course," she said, smiling. "You taught me how to make it." We both laughed then, and something fragile but real mended itself quietly between us. That night, after dinner, Daniel sat beside me on the couch. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "I know things haven't been perfect, but having you here, it feels right again." I looked at him. My son, the boy who once ran to me with flowers, now a man with lines of worry and love on his face. "It's not about being perfect," I told him. "It's about showing up even when it hurts." He nodded, then took my hand. "I'm glad you never stopped showing up." And in that moment, all the distance, all the misunderstandings melted away. Later that night, as I was leaving, Lena walked me to the door. She handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Something I wrote a while ago," she said softly. "Before the accident. I wasn't ready to send it, but I think you should have it now." When I got home, I made myself a cup of tea and opened the letter. It was short. "Dear Maggie, I know I've hurt you, but please know it wasn't out of hate. It was fear. Fear of losing my place in this family. Fear of never being enough. If you can forgive me someday, I'll be grateful. But even if you can't, I want you to know that I see you now, for who you are. The woman who raised my husband, the woman who holds our family together, even when we don't deserve it. Love, Lena." I read it twice, then again, and I wept. Not because it hurt, but because it healed. That night, as I sat by my window, I realized something. Sometimes love doesn't shout. It doesn't beg to be seen or thanked. It just keeps giving, quietly, steadily, faithfully, even when it's asked to leave. Even when it's forgotten, because real love doesn't end when you walk out the door. It simply waits for the door to open again. I still remember that morning clearly. It was late autumn, and the sky was a dull gray. The house felt cold, even though the heater was on. I woke up early, as I always did, and made breakfast for everyone: eggs, toast, and some tea. I placed everything neatly on the table, just the way they liked it. But no one came downstairs. I waited a few minutes, thinking maybe they were still getting ready. Then I heard faint laughter from upstairs, the sound of my son and his wife chatting in their room. It used to warm my heart hearing his laughter. But that day, it felt different, distant, like I was listening from another world. When they finally came down, my daughter-in-law looked surprised to see me. "Oh, you didn't have to cook, Mom," she said quickly, glancing at her phone. "It's all right, dear," I replied softly. I like doing it. She didn't eat much that morning. She just grabbed a piece of toast, gave my son a quick look, and said, "We'll be late. Let's go." And just like that, they were gone. I sat there, staring at the untouched plates. The steam from the tea slowly disappeared, leaving behind only silence. Later that week, I noticed little changes around the house. My favorite vase, a small porcelain piece from my husband, had been moved to the back shelf. Some of my framed photos had disappeared from the hallway. When I asked her about it, she smiled and said, "Oh, I'm just decluttering, Mom. You know, keeping things modern." I nodded, but my heart felt heavy. Those photos weren't clutter. They were memories. One evening, I overheard them talking in the living room. I was walking down the hall when I heard my name. "She's nice," my daughter-in-law said, her voice low. "But it's hard having her here all the time." "She's my mother," my son replied quietly. "I know," she sighed, "but we need our own space. You said this house was ours, remember?" There was a long silence. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I backed away slowly before they could see me and went into my room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering all the nights I had stayed awake for my son. When he was sick, when he had nightmares, when he needed someone to talk to. I wondered if he remembered any of it. The next morning, I decided to have a gentle talk with her. I made tea, knocked on her door, and smiled. "Can we talk for a moment, dear?" She looked at me, polite but uneasy. "Sure, Mom," she said. We sat at the kitchen table. I spoke slowly, choosing my words carefully. "I know you both need space. I don't want to be in the way. But please, if there's something I can do differently, tell me." She looked at her cup of tea, then back at me. Her tone was calm but firm. "It's not that, Mom, it's just, things are different now. We're building our own life. It's hard to do that when we feel like we're living in someone else's world." I nodded. "I understand," I whispered. "But this house, it was meant for family. For all of us." She gave a small smile, the kind people give when they don't really agree but don't want to argue. "I appreciate that," she said. "I really do." Then she stood up and left. When she was gone, I sat there for a long time. The tea had gone cold, and so had my hands. Days turned into weeks. The silence between us grew louder. My son tried to keep peace, but even he seemed caught in between. "Mom, don't take it personally," he said once, placing his hand on mine. "She just wants to make this place feel like home for both of us." I smiled at him. "And what about me?" He looked away, unable to answer. One evening, I decided to make dinner, something special. I cooked his favorite dish, just like when he was a child. I wanted to bring back warmth, maybe laughter. I set the table, lit a candle, and waited. But when they came home, my daughter-in-law sighed. "Oh, you cooked," she said softly, glancing at the table. "Yes," I said with a small smile. "I thought we could eat together tonight," she hesitated. "Actually, we already ate." We stopped by a restaurant. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My heart dropped, but I kept my smile. "That's all right," I whispered. "Maybe next time." She nodded and went upstairs. I sat alone at that table, surrounded by the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I slowly ate my meal by myself, trying not to cry. A few days later, I came home from the market to find a small suitcase in my room. My clothes were neatly folded inside. On the nightstand was a note written in her handwriting. "Please don't misunderstand. We just think it's time you take a little break. Maybe visit your sister for a while?" I stood there holding the note. My legs felt weak. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the suitcase. When my son came home, I asked him quietly, "Did you know about this?" He looked down. "She just thought it might be good for everyone," he said softly. "For everyone?" I repeated. "Or just for her?" He didn't answer. That night, I packed the rest of my things, slowly, carefully. Every shirt, every small memory. When I zipped up the suitcase, I sat on the floor and looked around my room. The room where I had once watched my son take his first steps. Where laughter used to fill the walls. The next morning, I stood at the doorway with my bag. My son walked me to the car. My daughter-in-law stayed inside. "Take care of yourself, Mom," he said. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I smiled, forcing my lips not to tremble. "I always do," I whispered. Before I closed the car door, I looked at the house one last time. It looked smaller somehow, or maybe I just felt too big for it now. too full of memories that no longer belonged there. As the car drove away, I watched the house fade in the mirror until it disappeared completely. And then, I finally let myself cry. When I arrived at my sister's house, she opened the door before I even knocked. She didn't say anything at first. She just wrapped her arms around me. I held on to her tightly. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. "Come in, sister," she said softly. "You look tired," I nodded, smiling faintly. "It's been a long week." She made me tea and listened as I spoke. Really listened. I didn't need to explain everything. She already seemed to understand. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. The days that followed were quiet, but in that quiet, I began to breathe again. I helped her in the garden, we cooked together, and every evening we sat by the porch watching the sunset. The air there felt lighter, maybe because there was no tension, no careful walking on eggshells. At night, I would sit by the window, watching the stars. I often thought of my son. I missed him deeply. I wondered if he missed me too. I tried not to blame my daughter-in-law. Maybe she truly didn't mean to hurt me. Maybe she just didn't know what it meant to have a mother-in-law living with her. I tried to see things from her eyes. A young woman wanting her own life. Her own rhythm, her own rules, but still. My heart ached. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, my sister asked gently, "Do you think you'll go back?" I looked up a bit startled. "Go back?" She nodded. "To your home." I paused, holding a white towel in my hands. "I don't know if it's my home anymore." Her eyes softened. "Homes can change. But love, that can still find its way." Her words stayed with me long after she left the room. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It was from my son. He wrote, "Mom, I hope you're doing all right. The house feels different without you. I keep expecting to hear your footsteps in the kitchen every morning. I'm sorry for how things turned out. Maybe I didn't handle everything the right way. Please don't be angry with us. I know she meant well, but I should have stood up for you more. I miss you, Mom. Please come visit soon." I read those words over and over again, tears blurring the ink. My heart softened. Despite everything, he was still my boy. The same little child who once held my hand crossing the street, who cried when he scraped his knee, who whispered, "I love you," before bedtime. And suddenly, I knew I had to forgive. That evening, I took a walk in the garden. The air smelled of jasmine, and the sky was painted orange and gold. I whispered softly, as if talking to my late husband, "You were right. We can't hold on to our children forever. We just have to love them, even from afar." The next morning, I called my son. He sounded surprised but relieved to hear my voice. "Mom, I was just thinking about you." "I got your letter," I said gently. "Thank you for writing." There was a pause.
Mom,
"I'm sorry." "I know," I said softly. "It's all right. I just want you to be happy. Will you come visit?" he asked almost hesitantly. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Maybe one day. But for now, I think I'll stay here a while longer. I'm doing fine, really." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I love you, Mom." And just hearing that, those simple words, was enough to fill my heart again. Over time, the pain began to fade. It didn't disappear completely, no deep hurt ever does, but it became softer, easier to carry. I found peace in small things, watering the plants, baking bread, sitting under the sun. I even started writing a little, small notes to myself about forgiveness and change. Sometimes I'd look at old photographs of my son and smile. Not with sadness, but with gratitude. Because despite everything, I had raised a good man, a kind man, and even if his wife didn't always understand me, she loved him. That too was something I could respect. Months passed before I saw them again. It was spring when they visited. I was in the garden pruning roses when I heard a familiar voice. "Mom?" I turned around. There he was, standing with a bouquet of yellow tulips, my favorite. Behind him stood my daughter-in-law, holding a small box. For a second, my heart stopped. Then I smiled. I didn't expect you to today, I said, wiping my hands on my apron. We wanted to surprise you, my son said. She stepped forward and handed me the box. I made this for you, she said quietly. Inside was a framed photo, the three of us from years ago, laughing together in the kitchen. I remembered that day. I had flour on my face from baking, and she had teased me about it. I looked up at her. Her eyes were softer now. Maybe she too had learned something from all of this. Thank you, I said sincerely. It's beautiful, she smiled, a real smile this time, and said, We miss you at home. My son added, The house feels empty without you. I chuckled gently. That's all right. Maybe it's time for you both to fill it with your own laughter now. We stood there for a moment, quiet but content. The breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers. Birds chirped in the distance. Then I said softly, Would you like to stay for tea? They both nodded, smiling. That afternoon, we sat together on the porch. The sunlight painted everything golden. My daughter-in-law helped me pour the tea, and for the first time, there was no distance between us. We talked about small things, her new job, my sister's garden, my son's plans for the future. It wasn't forced. It was easy, natural. When they left, my daughter-in-law hugged me gently. I'm sorry for before, she whispered. I didn't understand what it meant to share a home, or a heart. I held her hand. It's all right, dear. We all learn in time. As their car drove away, I stood there in the doorway smiling through tears. But this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of peace. That night, I sat by the window again, just as I had done many months ago. The stars were bright and the air was calm. I closed my eyes and whispered, Sometimes love asks us to let go, just so it can find its way back. I realized then that I hadn't lost my son. I had simply watched him grow into a man, a husband, and one day maybe a father. My place in his life had changed, but my love never had. And as I sat there, with the moonlight washing over the room, I felt my heart settle, warm, full, and at peace. Sometimes, life teaches us lessons we never asked for. We raise our children, love them, guide them. And one day, they step into a life that doesn't always include us the way it once did. It hurts, it feels unfair. But love, real love, learns to make room for change. I used to think my story ended the day I left that house. But I was wrong. That was only the beginning of a different chapter, one where I found peace within myself, not in a place, but in understanding. My daughter-in-law and I never became best friends. But we learned to see each other not as enemies, but as two women who loved the same man in different ways. That alone was enough. If there's something I've learned, it's this. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it lightens the heart. And letting go doesn't mean we stop caring. It means we start trusting life again. So now, every morning when I see the sunrise, I whisper a small prayer of gratitude. For the love I gave, for the lessons I learned, for the strength to start over, and sometimes I still smile thinking of that day. The day she told me to leave. Because what happened after truly changed everything.